Hello, my name is Hilary Rose and you're listening to an episode of the Live Wild podcast. Today I speak with Sinead Brady. She is one of Ireland's leading career psychologists and we discuss transitioning back to work after parenthood, redefining the very definition of work-life balance, discovering what your transferable skills might be, and so much more.
Work-life balance is a really problematic term that does need to be broken down a little bit. And it's not about doing all of the things. It's about being a little bit more permissive to ourselves and saying, okay, so, what does good look like? What does better look like? And what does best look like? And, good this week might actually be grabbing a walk 2 evenings per week.
Yeah.
Better might look like maybe getting in a gym session, and best might look like getting a coffee with a friend as well.
And there's simple things when you break it down, but like when you're wrapped up in career and family, they're luxuries almost.
They are luxuries almost, but it's about kind of going, I'm giving myself permission to just take lunch every day and sit down and have it. And it's just been really kind to yourself, and that is hard won, and it's about starting with the tiniest steps.
I could have chatted to Sinead for days. She's super smart and has a beautiful way of defining the world of work better than anyone I know. So, if you're stuck in a job that's not fulfilling, or you're simply wondering what your next move is, then this chat may be for you.
Sinead Brady, the career psychologist. Thank you so much for joining me today on the Live Well podcast.
My pleasure, Hilary Rose.
So we met on the Today Show of all places in the green room with Maura and Dahi. I had been on talking about the young offenders and you came on talking about your career as the career psychologist. And we had a bit of crack in the green room. I loved it. And then I was so interested. I tuned in when we were sitting backstage and I was so interested in you and what you had to say. And I thought, I'm going to have to message her and get her on the podcast. So here we are. Yeah. So I love people's stories. I love their journey from getting from A to B. And I always call it the origin story. It's like a filmmaking term. What's the origin story of the character? So what is your origin story? How did you become the career psychologist?
So in my own practice and in my own business, I talk about curvy careers all the time, Hilary Rose. So a curvy career is kind of distinct and different from the linear career that we might talk and think about generally, which is kind of like title, promotion, and so on, based on the ages and stages that you're going through in your life. So by your 20s, you should have done X, 30s, Y, 40s, and it can feel really restrictive for some people. And it also is kind of the notion that you've one career from the time you leave school right the way through to the end. So I myself have a curvy career. So I grew up in rural Ireland in a little place called Clonkeefy in County Cavan. And my mum was a stay-at-home mum. My dad is a plumber. And I really, careers were the lens was very limited, and if I went to school at 4 because we would have lost a teacher in the school if I didn't, this kind of the usual kind of stuff. But there was a great love for education. My granny Brady, who's my dad's mum, was the first Catholic ward sister in the north of Ireland during the Troubles. And she was a psychiatric nurse. So there was always a love of education and reading and writing. My mum's uncle was really influential on it as well. So there was always a love of education. So I thrived in school, loved school. School kind of worked for me. But I really never knew what I wanted to be when I grew up. So at 17, I thought, well, I'm a good chatter. I think I really like what Ali McBeal does on TV, so let's try that. And that is ultimately what happened.
Wow.
So, and while I loved the study of law and what my colleagues and friends did there, I just wasn't cut out for it. I really felt that maybe I needed to be with young people working in maybe education before they needed to kind of become acquainted with somebody like myself or my colleagues and they might need the services. So at 22, I headed for the gates of Trinity College and walked up to the door of the head of department for education, for guidance and counselling, and said, I'd like to come on your course. And he goes, well, are you a teacher? And I said, I'm not a teacher. He goes, well, we can't let you on the course because you need to be teacher qualified. So I said, but I'll take your details and I'll come back to you. So about 2 weeks later, he came back to me and asked me, would I still be interested in the course to come in and have a chat with him? So I did. His name is Professor Michael O'Rourke. And he said, actually, we have one other person who is interested and we're going to make an exception. Now, I think the fact that the other person happened to be a niece of the ex-president of Ireland helped my case entirely.
Amazing. But
the two of us,
yeah,
I just literally happened to be in the right place at the right time on this occasion. So the two of us began the course in Trinity as guidance counsellors, but not qualified as teachers.
Okay.
So I really wanted to work in the education sector. She wanted to work in the third level sector, qualified from that. And honestly, I've never looked back. So career guidance was my initial kind of entrance into the whole area of careers. And I was fascinated by the idea that, we could, through nurturing stakeholders in children's lives, really support them to get through their education. And as they get through their education, to find a space in the world of work that works for them, but that supports them to be connected to whatever it is they wanted to do. So I absolutely thrived in that, loved it, loved working with young people. Well-being was really, really important. So, we kind of worked on everything from supporting from a mental health perspective right the way through to working with stakeholders, like it would have been not TUSLA as it is now, but junior liaison officers, all of those different stakeholders. So I really thrived there, loved it, loved working with kids, loved supporting them, loved helping them find a place and kind of saying to them, if you don't get what you want in your Leaving Cert, that is not the biggest deal. Yes, it's disappointment, but there are other ways to go into the world of work. And also in rural areas, when I was talking to some children about careers, it was like I was looking back at myself and I didn't know about the Big Five and I didn't know about all of these different graduate programs. I didn't know what a milk round was. I had no exposure to that in my home. We loved education. Education was exciting. But when it came to that kind of careers talk, we weren't really familiar with it. So I loved translating that for other children so that they knew when it came to that time in college or whatever they decided to do, that they had a place at that table. So that's how I ended up kind of to my mid-20s in my career. And then I realized that, the skills that I had needed to be embellished. So I felt that psychology was the way into that. So I did my conversion master's in psychology through Queen's University Belfast, and subsequently trained as a coaching psychologist, work and organizational psychologist. And that's how I found my space. So I set up my business after I had our first daughter in 2012. And here I am since.
Wow.
Yeah.
And so how do you think becoming a mum has changed your perspective or has changed the shape of your career?
Oh, it's changed it in every way. So, I'm a mum to four, so I have a 12-year-old, an 11-year-old, a 5-year-old, and an almost 4-year-old.
Oh my goodness, you're in the thick of it.
It's managed mayhem. But I suppose when I think about it, my grandparents were a great influence in my life, and I said to my granny, Riley, on my mum's side, I said when I was pregnant with Clive, I said, what changes when you become a mum? And she said, everything changes. But she said, you see that little kitten in the corner over there? She's a little cat. And I said, yeah, I do. And she goes, will you change from being a cat to being a tiger? And she said, you will do anything to protect your kids. It's very true. So after I had our first daughter, I suppose in the world of work, I experienced a really and many mothers experience this as well, Hilary Rose, a really difficult transition back to work. So when I was about to return to work, actually 6 weeks after I had our first daughter, I was asked to change roles, to come back to do a job that wasn't the one I had left, that was in a completely different area. And, when it came to, so I'd spent my 10 years previous advocating on behalf of children and of their parents and making sure that they got what they deserved. And then when it came to advocating for myself after I had our first little girl, I nearly wasn't able to, because return to work after your first child is really, I found it a difficult transition.
It is very difficult. I agree. Yeah.
Yeah, really hard. I kind of was stuck between, and now I know the word for it, it's a liminal space. I was between these two identities. When I'd left work before we'd had our first daughter, I was Sinead, and my career was interdependent on my partner. But the care for somebody else wasn't there. And then I was going back to work into this kind of abyss where I couldn't suddenly spend all the time that I would have previously before. There was expectations of me to go back to something that I hadn't done before. I knew that it wasn't the right thing for me or my career or the students that I was going to be working with. So I fundamentally had to make the decision not to go back to that particular role, despite it being one that I loved, because I couldn't go back to do something that I wasn't, comfortable doing. So having Sive, I think, was the catalyst. And when I look back now, there were lots of warning signs that I should have left that role, probably. But she gave me the courage, because I knew that I had to, in order to be a good mother to her, I had to be able to come home from work and have the energy to be her mum. So, and it was really hard. And that it sounds like it was an easy decision, as I say to you now, but it wasn't. It felt really dark at the time. It felt really hard. And it was that time, like, you had a permanent pensionable job, and returning to it seemed like the logical thing to do, except where it was impacting how you felt about yourself. And it really did impact how I felt about myself. It felt really dark at that time. So I didn't go back, and I set up my own business, but nobody was talking about careers. Nobody in organizations were talking about careers. The whole TikTok trend that's there now wasn't there. So I really had to forge a business from the start. I wasn't connected to, hadn't those connections in organizations or anything like that. So I really started from scratch, and probably for the first 3 years of business earned very little because I had to build a business from the ground. And becoming a mother changed everything.
Yeah. And I see this repeatedly amongst mothers, myself included, in that, you go from having, this big career, which is all encompassing. You have your kid, and then, your values and perspectives change, I believe, for the better, for me anyway, certainly. But it's still, like you said, this dark space that you're like, okay, and like a liminal space is such a perfect way to describe it. Okay, where am I now? Who am I now? What can I offer now? And what can I glean from, all this 20 years of experience, massive experience that I have, and move forward and shape it into something different? And inevitably, there is that space in between. We're not earning anything. It just feels so unfair to now have small kids on top of trying to build a business. That's crazy. It's just so many women do it. After becoming a mum, I just became so blown away at how amazing women are. I actually, and it might sound silly, but I didn't have the full picture until then. I went, my goodness, we're amazing. What women can do.
I 100% agree. And it also made me respect so much what the generations before us have done for us.
Oh, yes.
Because they have opened up doors and paved, and like, it's upon their shoulders that we stand. And we still have a journey to go. There's lots of things that need improving. But I think when I'm out talking to organizations and working with people on their careers, like I say, like, we're kind of a frontier generation. We are the first generation of not just working mothers, but working parents, whether that be you're a solo parent, a single parent, or whatever the makeup of your home is, because not everybody has 2-parent homes. Not everybody has a family or support network to fall back on. And we really are this whole frontier of new people in the world of work who are shifting and changing what the expectations are for that world of work for the rest of us, and for the generations that come behind.
Exactly. Yeah. I always say it as well. I always say it to anybody who listen. I say, we're the first generation of women to graduate, be educated, travel independently, have our own money. And then we more often than not meet somebody, get married, have a family. And then we slot back into this old way of being that we're not actually geared for anymore. And then we have to try and work ourselves around that, reshape that mold. And like you said, set it up for the next generation. I look at my daughter and I'm like, I want it to be better for her. Not that I don't have a bad, but at the same time, but you improve upon what you know for every generation. And that's what I'm trying to figure out as I go as well. It's so interesting. And the second thing that I always say about women who are mums and working. And again, you go back to looking at the generation that has come before you. I look at my mum and I think, she was a homemaker as well. She didn't go into the workforce, but the amount of value, if we were to break down and monetize the value of what we put into the household, it adds up to about 200K a year.
That's right. Yeah.
It's remarkable. And so I think it's really important for both men and women to recognize that and say, okay, I'm bringing in a value input of about 200 grand into the house. And so maybe something's got to give.
I think it's remarkable, so what you're talking about is the unpaid labor of the home that we take for granted, that we don't see value in. And if you take, for example, and that unpaid labor, that's very distinct from caring and loving your children. And that
100%.
sometimes get mixed up. That sometimes gets confused in the conversation. Unpaid labor is the housework. It is the cooking, the cleaning, the washing. That's unpaid labor.
Yes.
And it's not seen as actual value.
Yes.
There's no labor attached to loving your children. That's just a very distinct, different thing. And I always say to people, if you bring your child to a creche, for example, the brilliant professionals that are in our creche, the early educators, they're not tasked with also cooking, washing, cleaning, and so on. Their full sole focus is on attention to the children, the babies in those rooms. And somebody else does the cleaning, somebody else does the... So if you happen to be, it is okay to actually need help with that unpaid labor. It is okay to call that out as being something that needs to be shared with other people within the home. And, I'll often challenge in the workplace and I'll say, you're a leader and that's great, but where are you leading? And if you're only leading in the workplace and you're not leading breaking down narratives in the home, our diversity and inclusion endeavours have no way forward, because you have to lead in both places. You have to see both places as connected to and really valuable for one another. So if you happen to come home and think that the food should be in the fridge or that dinner should be on the table or the washing should be done because you have a stay-at-home partner, that's not leadership, either in the workplace or at home. That's actually taking advantage of unpaid labor.
That is so interesting. And I love that you're making the distinct difference about loving your family and loving your children as opposed to the unpaid labor. And again, just to reiterate, I suppose I was looking at, okay, what if you broke it down and put a price on it and outsourced it to people? That would be the value of it. That's so interesting. How do you think, this generation of women, this is a big question, but how do we tackle that?
It's really hard because it's also tied up in the emotion of our relationships. It's tied up in, and it's really, really hard. I know that myself and my partner, we don't have it perfect. And, we try really hard, but I think the only way we can manage it is to have conversations. And it's to have these conversations where we're not talking about this is what you do and this is what I do. It's about how do we share this? How do we manage this together? But they're really complicated conversations, and they're not helped often by some of the narratives that exist, where one person happens to be the default homemaker, but also the breadwinner, but also contributing to the paid, to the paid work outside of the home.
Yes.
So we have to begin to see these things not just as the remit of one person, but as a shared endeavour that is required for the home to run. There's a great app called Our Home. And it basically just takes all the tasks that happens in a home and breaks them down, and is really helpful in kind of going, these are the things that need to happen to make our home function. What are you doing? What am I doing? What's each other person that lives within our home? Because again, not every home is a nuclear family.
Yes.
So there may be other adults in the home. There may be multi-generations in their home. There may be older or younger children in the home. So it kind of just gives this, and everybody can have it, and everybody has access to it. And basically, you get your tasks. The other thing I would say is we've 4 kids. We both are self-employed. We don't have it perfect, but back a while ago, we were sitting and for me, like I would cook usually and my partner would do the cleanup.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, the cleanup needed to be done before we sat down to have our cup of tea in the evening.
Mm-hmm.
And I would sit fuming because I was like, the kitchen's a mess. Like, how can we relax and have our cup of tea? And I think we have to let go of perfection a little bit.
Oh, yeah.
You know, rather than
struggle with that, Sinead, so much.
It's so hard.
I would imagine that it could be similar in that respect. I'm like, why is there stuff everywhere constantly?
Clean the house, like just clean up after dinner. Mm-hmm. And it's like, you know what? And I said it eventually after fuming, you know, because he was irritating me from everything he did, to the way he was breathing, to the way he was moving his toes as I was trying to have my cup of tea, and this kind of just mayhem was behind us. And I said, like, would you not just clean up before we have our cup of tea? And he said, like, Sinead, you know, you do the cooking the way you do it, and I don't get involved. So we've agreed I'll do the cleaning. So could we please just let me do the cleaning the way I do it?
Okay. Oh, yeah.
And that really got me, because that was the agreement. There was never an agreement around how it would be done. It was about what
it will be done. Yeah.
It will be done.
That's good communication. That's actually really good communication. I feel like sometimes it breaks down into the blame game, and that's when you get into a very, very dysfunctional cycle, you know.
Yeah. And we do that sometimes too, like, you know, but you have to be able to come out of that again.
Yes.
So it is about kind of just these conversations, and it's about being okay. Like, again, our kids, so I work typically 2 days away from home. We're based in Cavan, 2 days away from home per week. And we have those days kind of set in stone. So I know that on Tuesday and Thursday, typically, I'm away from home. That means my partner be at home those days. So the agreement is that childcare will be taken care of by, you know, if there's any issues about kids being dropped off or pick up, Tuesday and Thursday, he does them. That's it. I don't have to think about them on Tuesday or Thursday, even if I'm at home. Or if one of our children are sick and have to be collected, Tuesday, Thursday, it is up to him to do that. Monday and Wednesday, it is me, because he travels or he's doing, you know, the things that he needs to do on Tuesday or Monday and Wednesday. And then Friday's kind of up for grabs depending on who is most busy that particular week or who needs it the most. So we kind of had to put a pattern in place, because without it, you know, you don't know when you can put meetings in, you don't know when you can schedule. So when you have a tempo or a pattern, and it also means that if somebody is sick, because inevitably they get sick, you know that your whole week isn't you know that it's not one person that gives over their whole week, that it's kind of in some way negotiated or navigated so that both people can function in and at their work. If that's the agreement that you have, if both people are outside of the home working.
That's so interesting, because I went through a phase recently of the first kid got sick. That was 1 week. The second kid got sick. That was the second week. Then I got sick. That was the third week. And it's like, that's the bones of the month gone.
Yeah.
You know, it's just full really on. Yeah, it is. When people come to you looking for advice, what are the repeated patterns that you see? Like, what are the challenges that become a theme that you're seeing in people across the board?
So there's probably 2 or 3 things, Hilary Rose. The first one is kind of coming maybe, again, after a particular transition point in your life. And that could be becoming a parent. It might be the end of a relationship or the beginning of a relationship. It could be death. It could be a health diagnosis. You know, there's major life transitions. And it's where people are really reevaluating, going, I'm not sure what I'm doing in my career is actually what I ever wanted to do. Wow. And, you know, they're looking back maybe at their 17 or 18-year-old self and going, like, I chose off the back of maybe what was expected of me, or the world that I knew it as it was then, but now I see that there are so many other things that I could do. And they're really thinking about maybe making a career transition or a career evolution off the back of that. And that really happens quite a bit. The other thing that I see is you have people that have kind of their career identity has consumed their personal identity.
Oh, yes.
And they're really struggling with what might be called work-life balance, which I have a fundamental disagreement with the term of work-life balance, because it does suggest that there's some kind of a mathematical equation that we can apply to work and life, that if you strike it, you've got success. It's also deeply gendered, actually, as a concept, because the way people who identify male and people who identify women who are in traditional relationships actually use work-life balance as a term is really reinforcing of very, very deep patriarchal systems. So
how so? Can I just pick that one apart quickly? How so?
Yeah, of course. So the research tells us that there are expectations around how women should use work-life balance when they become a parent and how men should use work-life balance when they become a parent. So, for example, women should use work-life balance, for example, to develop structures to support childcare. So, for example, so it's not about hobbies or interests. It's about supporting the family unit. It's about being available for childcare and so on. And then on the other hand, when men are expected, or, fathers, use work-life balance, it is to be able to attend things that are required. So it's kind of the events that are necessary to progress and get better in their career. It's not considered to be for reducing their work schedule or for finishing on time in order to be able to support with their children. So it narrows our sense of entitlement then. So what happens is access to promotion, gender pay gaps, etc., begins to widen as women become mothers, and then work intensification begins to happen as men become fathers. So we have this thing called a fatherhood premium, whereby men get, on average, a pay rise within the first 6 months of becoming a parent. So they become financially rewarded with promotion, title perhaps, and financial rewards within that first 6 months, which intensifies their work patterns. And then we have mothers who are at home, typically still on maternity leave in that first 6 months. So the gap in the payments, perhaps between mother, and then it's like, well, who goes back to work, or how do we manage this? Well, I'm earning more, and there's this whole narrative and conversation. So the way we access work-life balance is very, very different. The way we think about it is very different, and the impact of that is very different. So, and that tempers a sense of entitlement. For example, for men who are fathers to be carers, to be at home at the times that they want to be. And this is really, I think, something we need to talk about a lot more, because kind of the notion that men just aren't that caring is completely wrong. We've been socialized to think that men don't do these things, but men do. Men are deeply caring. Men are deeply kind, and they're very good. And where they're involved with their children in a caring capacity, there's much better mental health outcomes for those children. So it's really, really important. And it's equally important and it's about the choice, so it's about breaking down these narratives. So it's really interesting, the research that's been done at the moment, because it's broadening the perspective. It's beginning to look through a more critical lens at how can we make the world of work better, not just for one or two groups, but for more people generally. So, but work-life balance is a really problematic term that does need to be broken down a little bit. And it's not about doing all of the things. It's about being a little bit more permissive to ourselves and saying, okay, so, what does good look like? What does better look like? And what does best look like? And, good this week might actually be grabbing a walk 2 evenings per week. Yeah. Better might look like maybe getting in a gym session, and best might look like getting a coffee with a friend as well.
And there's simple things when you break it down, but like when you're wrapped up in career and family, they're luxuries almost.
They are luxuries almost, but it's about kind of going, I'm giving myself permission to just take lunch every day and sit down and have it. And it's just been really kind to yourself. And that is hard won. And it's about starting with the tiniest steps. So they're two of the big things that I see people come with, going through a transition because something has happened kind of maybe in their wider life. And they're thinking, okay, I really need change here. This hasn't been or isn't it's no longer what I want it to be. Or I've been promoted so much to the point where I don't recognize the job that I do anymore. And while I loved it at one point, I don't really like it anymore. And then on the other side, it's where people are struggling to manage it all. And they go, something has to give.
And this is where you get into burnout territory, which I've experienced a couple of times as well. So what are the red flags for burnout?
Hey, if you're enjoying this episode and you'd like to show your support, if you like, you can buy us a coffee using the Buy Me a Coffee app or online at buymeacoffee.com/livewildpodcast, or just click the link in our show notes, it will take you there. Alternatively, you can also donate crypto to the show using the BitDonate app or at bitdonate.com and search for Live Wild, or just follow the link in the show notes. Either or both those donations really help us make the best show possible. And as always, you can like, subscribe, and share the show with your mates or on social media. Thank you so much for your help.
So they tend to start with kind of, a loss of interest in things that, so for example, things that you once looked forward to doing, they're kind of recreational activities. So we might kind of more commonly refer to them as hobbies. They're recreational activities, the things that you look forward to and you said, oh my God, I can't wait to do that this week or this evening or at the weekend. Your energy levels begin to drop to the point where it feels like a chore rather than something that you actually like to do. So you begin to lose joy or enjoyment from the things that once provided a source of enjoyment for you. You're very irritable. So the smallest things irritate you. Things that once you could have passed over are now really, you become irritable quite quickly. Your tolerance levels for small things, again, this is not about, but your tolerance levels just slip. You can become angry very quickly. Sleep patterns. It's difficult to go to sleep, difficult to stay at sleep, and then difficult to get back to sleep. Other things that can really happen is you can notice a change in your skin. You can notice a change in your nails. You might have that back where your kind of shoulders are tensed up. And
yes,
they're the really early signs that something is just not right. So beginning to kind of look at some of those broader pieces, and you don't lie to yourself very often. So, if you're in a workplace, for example, where it's really busy and people are overwhelmed, the resources that you have to do the job outstrip what you have, the ability you have to do the job, because it's just busy all the time. And rather than more resources being given to you, you're getting resilience training, or you're getting like how to cope with stress training. There are other red flags.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, listen to yourself. And we do have a little bit of a toxic relationship with stress and resilience and our capacity to manage them. Sometimes our capacity is so overstretched that it's not possible to do what we're been asked to do.
So when you talk about signs that you might need a new career, like what are the things that would crop up? Like, again, we've talked about red flags for, we'll say, burnout, but signs, that's probably something different from signs that you need a new career. So how would you differentiate between the two?
That's a really brilliant question. So often burnout is a function of the environment that you're working in. So that's an environmental factor. That is about maybe the team you're within, it's the function you're within, the industry you're within, or the organization you're within. So that tends to be related to the environmental factors. It could also have something to do with, you might be attention to detail, perfectionist, not to blame you by any standards, but you could really take pride in working very hard and working long hours and so on. So some of those factors are there. When it comes to your career, it's about the function of what you do. So have you, or do you still enjoy the function of what you do? So when I'm working with clients, or when I'm working with individuals or with organizations, I'd always say, on a day-to-day basis, what engages you? What do you get real joy from? And that's the function of what you do. And sometimes it's actually not about a career change at all. It's about a role change, because you've gotten caught up in what your job has become, that you've lost connection with the function of what you do. And it may actually be about, I still actually really like the role. I really like the career that I have. But where I am doing it, the environment that I'm doing it in, has kind of pulled my love for that out. So before people jump into a career change, I would always say, just pause for a moment. Is there a way that we can get you to disconnect from the role that you're currently in emotionally, so that you can do that job kind of with your eyes closed and kind of have a source of financial security? Obviously, if you're in burnout territory and it's a medical issue, that's very different. You need to be looked after from a medical perspective. But if not, can you withdraw emotionally from your role and do it for maybe 12 months to 18 months and use it as a pivot role, so that you can take your energy then and apply it outside of the workplace to make the change that you need. And career change can happen, absolutely, and loads of people do it, but it's not quick. It doesn't happen overnight, and it can take up to 2 years, depending on the regulation within the industry that you're going to, what kind of qualifications and so on you need. So the first thing I'd say to people is pause, take a deep breath. If you need to change role in order to escape the environment that you're in, that's a very plausible thing to do. And you go into the next role, strong boundaries in place. And in that role, then you begin to work on changing the function of what you do so that you make the transition and the evolution to be quite seamless. But when it comes to career change, we need to begin to think more curvy. So this is about skills evolution. It's about development of skills. Jobs are not really defined by their title anymore. It's got to do with what you can do. What's your talent? What's your transferable skills? And how can you apply them in this particular role?
That's so interesting, because I like that you brought up the topic of, or the point that, once upon a time you went into a job and it was a job for life and it was a pension, and even better if it was a state job, that was the thought process. I remember my parents looking at me going, what is she doing now? God love them, because that was the generation that they came from. And that's absolutely fair enough. When people have this curvy career, how do you distinguish between people who are slightly all over the place or those that are just exploring? And how can you encourage them to stay on track?
So there's a couple of different things. It really depends on the individual, and that's not to be evasive, but it's about, if you have a curvy career, you are still collecting skills, you're still building skills, and you're still building transferable skills. So it's not about title. And what I would say is a curvy career is different from changing your mind several times because it is strategic. So you're quite proactive in your career. So you can tell the story of it. You understand why you've made the decision. You understand what you've done it for, and it has been strategic. So you have made the decision because you wanted maybe to develop in your career, and you weren't in an area or a function or an industry or an organization that maybe aligned with your values. So you made the decision to move to a different. So it might be, maybe moving from organizations that are driven by radical profit to moving to non-for-profit, but you're still doing the same type of work or still using the same skills. So curvy careers have a story and they are strategic, and you understand the story. So when somebody comes to you and says, well, last month you were a project manager and this month, or, you're able to say, well, actually, I have this set of skills and I've just transferred them across. My career is curvy, and I've had time out of the workplace for becoming a parent. I've also had time out of the workplace to care for somebody that I love. And I've taken time out of the workplace to protect my mental health. And it might be or any of the combination of those. But a curvy career is just about life happening alongside a career and making changes that work for you during different seasons of your life.
What's the biggest tip for people who are self-employed? Because I think that's always a tricky one. You have to have the motivation to keep going. More often than not, you're in an office on your own, developing your career or developing your business and your path. And that can be very slow going. You can make a lot of mistakes. What's the number one thing you would tell people who are self-employed?
Oh, so that's a really good question, because the number one thing is really hard. I would say it is to try and keep some boundaries between work and life, because if you allow those boundaries to collapse entirely, particularly if you are working from a space within your home, if you allow those boundaries to completely collapse, it becomes really hard to build them back up again. So you do have to be kind of strict with yourself, and you do have to be strict with, depending on the type of industry that you're in, if it's a service industry or you're a product, how you are managing your time around that, because you cannot give everything to your business. Nothing will remain after a short space of time. The key is you want a sustainable business. You want a business that can sustain you and your life across the course of your lifetime. So that does involve community. It involves support. I mean, I'm part of what's called an Acorns community. It is a mentorship community for women in business outside of the main urban hubs in Ireland. It's run by a lady called Paula Fitzsimons, and it's a non-for-profit, and it's run by the Department of Agriculture. But the idea is that every year you work along with a lead entrepreneur, an entrepreneur who has ran their own business successfully, and they support you across 6 different areas. So it's around finances, it's around marketing, it's around, and then the other modules depend.
Super.
But it's absolutely brilliant because it keeps you within a group of other people, because as you said, it can be really, really lonely. It also means you're exposed to kind of strategy and timelines, and don't be afraid of the money. And what I mean by that is, I think when we're in business, we're kind of going, oh Jesus, finances, and you have to have goals. You have to have strategy behind your financial goals. And it's okay to say no to people who are asking you to do stuff for free, essentially.
Yeah.
You kind of have to be able to say, you know what, I actually, if I go to speak at your event and it's, 2-hour journey away, and I have to prepare, and then I have to drive home, I actually can't do that for nothing.
No, it's a full day. Yeah.
It's a full day. And, you be strategic around that as well, obviously. And like, I know in the early stages of my own business, I had to do some of that stuff for exposure, but it gets to the point where you're going, no, actually, I can do it absolutely for a charity, or I can, but you have to be strategic, I think. I don't know. What do you think, Hilary Rose?
Yeah, I mean, I remember being, an actor starting out 20 odd years ago. And in that business, you worked for free for the first couple of years, really. So, I mean, I had a whole separate career as a DJ, and I was working in restaurants, just cobbling together to try and set up this career for myself. And yeah, it was, but then I came to a point, and I remember it so clearly, and I was quite young. I was, in my mid-20s, I suppose. I came to a point and I just went, you know what, if I continue to work for free, I'll be the actor that works for free. And I don't want that, because that's not sustainable. So I remember saying no to jobs, and I went, okay, this means that inevitably I'm not going to work for a while. And I didn't, but I had to set that boundary of, I'm not going to work for free anymore. I'm moving into a different level. I'm not the actor that works for free. And I had to be really clear on that. And it worked for me eventually. It was more of a mindset shift, even within me, more than anything else. Something that I could probably do with now as well. It's just like changing mindset. I'm really interested actually in mindset. I'm sure it's part of what you do as well. How would you go about encouraging someone to change their mindset if they're hung up on a particular thing about their career?
So with their careers, there are an awful lot of rules attached. So, for example, and this impacts our mindset. For example, people will have a rule: if I have a permanent pensionable job, I must stay in that job. And I get that. If I'm a certain age, I can't change. If I've spent this long in a career, I've wasted my time to this point. So we have these rules. Some of the other rules that we might have is like that, around gender. And so we've got all these different sets of rules. And mindset's really important here, because we need to identify the rule that we have that perhaps is holding us back or limiting what we think we can do. So, for example, a rule that you might have sometimes is, I can't say no, because if I say no, I'll miss out.
Yes.
And even if that no is the right no in this moment, you sometimes feel that you can't. So it's really important to understand the rules that you have and where they originate from. And then we can talk about growth and fixed mindset, but I think it's really, I call it a permission mindset. It's about permission to, with curiosity, question that rule that you have. Go, okay, so what's suggesting that I'm too old to change? Or what is this, why do I think this? And you just chip away at it, and you give yourself permission with curiosity and kindness to go, well, okay, so if I did this, so to take tiny steps and go, well, okay, so if I'm too old, then that means that I wouldn't be able to sign up for this course. But there's no rule in this course that says age is an issue. So I can sign up for this course. If I can sign up for this course, then I can do this course. And if I can do this course, then I can give myself permission to find the time to do this course. And, so you just start to give yourself this series of curious questions with permission.
I love that. Curious questions with permission. That is amazing. That needs to be your next book.
Your permission mindset, I call it. Yeah. And it makes such a difference. It's like, it's just like, why? Why do I think this?
Yeah. Okay, and why exactly? Why can't I do it? And, I'm peeling back the layer of how did that get planted there in the first place? That's a deep one to go into that, but it's important. Yeah.
It is. And it's hard sometimes, but, it gives great clarity then around, okay, so this is why. This is why I want to do this during this season of my life. And you feel more that you're making choices rather than perhaps a sacrifice.
I love that you've brought up the word season. You've said it twice, and I really find it interesting. We do have seasons in our life. We do have seasons in our career. You can't always be up. It doesn't work that way. And you won't always be down either, And I think it's so important. I mean, for me as an actor, it's probably one of the number one things that I had to contend with as my career progressed. That and rejection, which I think is an interesting thing to talk about as well. What do you say to people who don't recognize the seasons, or like, how do you recognize seasons within your own life and career?
I suppose I, like yourself, have grown up kind of understanding what the world looks like through the lens of equality and so on. And I found it really hard to adjust to the season of life of becoming a mother, because I've seen that despite the fact that we have all these ideas about equality, they don't always translate into practice. So I found that season really challenging. I found it really, really hard. But actually understanding it and understanding what was within my control, what I could manage and what I had agency over, and then what I could impact, really helped. And we do have different seasons of life. And, for example, we know that women experience their career in a different way than men because we give birth to children, those of us who can or who choose to. So there is a season of our life where we are actually caring and rearing our children. And during that season, it is really hard to give the amount of time that you gave before. But when you come out of that season, you can absolutely do that again, should you choose to. And we should, I really believe, Hilary Rose, that we should recognize the skills that are built in parenting as transferable to the workplace.
100%.
Oh. And
I deal with actors. So yeah, it's like a crash.
It's like, I love that. But we need to kind of go. So if we can recognize the skills that come off a sports pitch, and we can recognize them as being transferable to the workplace, we should we will say, if somebody's a great sports person, we say they're a great leader. And then we transfer that into the workplace. And we often see people come from the sports pitch into senior positions in organizations, professional sport into senior positions in organization, because the skills from sport is a narrative that we accept as being transferable to the paid workplace. We need to do that for parenting. Wow. If you take time out of the paid workplace to parent, let you be a mother or a non-birthing partner or a father, we have to recognize that the skills built during that time are transferable to the paid workplace.
Wow. It's like what you said. Sorry to interrupt. No, finish your thought.
No, go for it.
No, I'm just thinking of what your grandmother taught you at the very beginning of this conversation, where it's like that kitten will turn into a tiger, and who doesn't want a tiger on their team when it comes to the workplace,
Absolutely. And who doesn't want somebody that's on time? And who doesn't want somebody that can balance a budget when a home is reduced to one income? Who doesn't want somebody who can advocate on behalf of somebody who has literally no voice? And that's like, if you're, for example, taking care of a child with additional needs, or you are advocating on their behalf to access resources. You know how to research. So we need to begin to see the skills that are built in as parents as being transferable to the world of work in the same way as we do from the sports pitch.
That's so interesting. I really like that piece. What's the most valuable piece of advice that you were ever given in your career?
Oh, that's a good question. The most valuable piece of advice, I suppose, it was never to underestimate myself. Yeah. So, and the way it was put to me was like, I wish that, don't underestimate yourself, Sinead. And I wish that you could see yourself through the eyes that I see you.
That's lovely.
Yeah.
It's actually really lovely. Yeah.
Yeah. And it was really, really like, it kind of, even now, sometimes I go, I wish I could have that person's eyes sometimes, because you do doubt yourself, and you do wonder, if you're doing the right thing and if you're, so yeah, but that was a really valuable. Don't underestimate yourself. And, I wish you could see yourself through my eyes.
That is a beautiful place to leave it. I think I could talk to you all day. Honestly, I think you should come back and do another season if you could. That would be amazing. Sinead Brady, the career psychologist. Thank you so much for joining me today. Before we go, there's a Live Wild quick fire round that I want to throw at you. Is that okay?
Go first.
All right. Okay. What has been your okay, hang on. I'm going to rephrase this. What is your favorite job and why?
Oh, I used to love, I waitressed in New York for a couple of summers, and I absolutely loved waitressing. Loved it. Really enjoyed the connection with people. I really enjoyed, so like that's kind of the freedom one, the one where I was waiting tables, meeting people all the time, talking to people all the time. I absolutely loved it. I had no responsibility in the world whatsoever. Yeah. My tips went in my pocket, my pay went in my pocket. Yeah. And it just reminds me of this like...
Apologies to the listeners and to Sinead herself. Just as we were recording the very final moments of this podcast, my internet decided to give up. So I'm sorry, but we'll have to leave it there. Thank you. I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you for being here. We hope you enjoyed listening as much as we enjoyed making these episodes. Thank you, as always, to our amazing guests. A special thank you to Aoife McNamara, my co-producer extraordinaire from Imagine Media. Please like, share, subscribe and rate us. It all really helps. And remember, this content is for education and entertainment purposes. In short, it's not gospel. I always say, take what resonates with you and leave the rest. Always question everything and do your own research.